Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we are going to explore the topic of reality begins with consciousness, which is the title of the book co-authored by my guest, Dr. Vernon Neppe. Dr. Neppe is a neuropsychiatrist, but also a consciousness theorist and the co-author of the book, Reality Begins with Consciousness, with his colleague, physicist and mathematician, Dr. Edward Close. Dr. Neppe has also written extensively about déjà vu, a trilogy of books on that topic, and other books in the field of psychopharmacology. So one might call him a polymath. Welcome again, Vernon.
Thank you so much, Jeff.
It's a pleasure to be with you once again. Now, in a previous interview, we talked about how space, time, and consciousness are all intrinsically linked together. Tethered is the word that you use. You can't think of space or time or consciousness without the other two. And now we're talking about reality begins with consciousness. It suggests more the Vedic viewpoint that time and space emerge out of consciousness.
Yes, the term reality begins with consciousness, a paradigm shift that works. The title of the book that I authored with Edward Close does imply that maybe the consciousness has a very, very important role, and this is what we've tried to transmit. And that word begins is because otherwise people would say, well, when does it link? And if you're talking about infinity and the finite, where do they link up? And you've used that term tethered, which is more than a linkage. It's like an arm and a hand. They cannot exist without each other. And so this is why, in a way, we use that word begins with consciousness, because we wanted to say how fundamental consciousness was. It was fundamental with the whole concept of space and time, and it was fundamental with the whole concept of mass and energy, but it might have been even more fundamental, because before that space and time, before that mass and energy, that word begins might imply with the consciousness, but actually I don't see it as a Vedic kind of concept. I almost see it as an infinite concept. It never really begins because it never really does not exist. So reality begins with consciousness is the linkage of saying consciousness is there, reality is there, the infinite is there, everything is linked in the finite reality from the very beginning. So from the very beginning, reality begins with consciousness and space and time and mass and energy. But even before that, if existence is infinite, and this is fundamental within our model of what we call triadic, dimensional, distinction, vortical paradigm, a big phrase, abbreviated to TDVP, triadic, three components, space-time consciousness, but we've said that is consciousness extent. Later on, the three components, mass, energy, consciousness of content, triadic. Everything in reality we find comes in threes. Sometimes they paired together as threes. Dimensional, because there's extension, measurement. Distinction is just a little extra because we're making distinctions the whole time. So we've distinguished, for example, the overt reality that we experience. from our existence. That's one kind of distinction. We've distinguished the content, the container, from the measures.
When you
the
refer
extent.
to our existence, I gather that you're talking about our existence maybe as infinite beings.
Exactly that. Our existence in this broader context of a unified existence of us being infinite and also finite. And finite has a finite place. We born and we die. And previously we've said that the evidence in relation to survival after bodily death, if one looks at this objectively and scientifically and in terms of data, we discussed the Moroczy-Korchnoi game with skills and data sets,
yes.
difficult to explain in any other way. We can't explain it by a philosophical mechanism called super psi, for example. But when one looks at this whole thing, that's the continuity. But the finite reality has components where there's a beginning and an end. The infinite doesn't have a beginning and an end at all. And so that's where some of this comes in. Triadic, dimensional, we make distinctions all the time. Vortical. You know, I thought initially, I started to develop this idea in the 1980s, and I thought this is the craziest idea. And yet I noticed everything in reality had movements, had rotational movements.
Yes.
There wasn't anything that was non-rotational. There could be linear, there could be points, meeting at certain points in terms of those communications. And those points of communications that occur suddenly produce points, almost areas of awareness. And we sometimes call those areas of awareness maybe psi. And this is why we have spoken about a mechanism of psi where these points of meeting, of awareness of these different areas occur. The vortical component, the rotational component, and then later on. Initially we hypothesized it, and then we proved it. There are 9 rotating dimensions. They are rotating across. Vertical. And then paradigm, this is really a paradigm shift, a new way of thinking. And we actually use the term meta-paradigm because it moves into all our different areas
now,
of thinking.
Now, the term paradigm was popularized by Thomas Kuhn in his book on the nature of scientific revolutions. And the way he used the term, as I understand it, is that a paradigm is not even conscious, it's subconscious. It's so implicit that we don't even know we have a paradigm.
Right.
So that when you present to people, here is my new paradigm, I would think a lot of people are not going to be able to grasp it at all because they have subconscious views they're not aware of that are in contradiction to your paradigm. So in the words of Robert Heinlein, the great science fiction writer, it doesn't grok.
Exactly that. There is enormous resistance.
Yeah.
And of course, Kuhn spoke about the different levels of scientific revolution in terms of change, in terms of thinking. We wrote a paper extending this in terms of different levels of change. You know, this stuff is too false to even be false.
Right.
You know, on the one side, absolute denial, it can't exist. And of
Not
course,
even false.
The paradigm of too false to be false is, it must be true, but the not even false component is, where does this fit in? And then gradually there's this resistance that maybe there's a little bit of data there.
In
maybe
order for something to be false to a conventional scientist, it needs to make sense. Then you can say it's false. It makes sense, I understand it, and it's false. But if it seems nonsensical, then it would be not even false.
Exactly that. And this introduces another great philosopher of science expert, and that is Karl Popper.
Yes, the philosopher of the scientific method.
Yeah, and you see, Popper introduced the idea that in order to be science, something has to be falsified.
Right.
And it's a problem because certain things have difficulty being falsified.
Like Popper's own theory.
True, exactly that. Very good.
Yeah.
And in terms of evolution, how do you falsify something going back into the past when we haven't got that whole aspect of time all the way through?
Yeah.
And certain cosmological theories. And in ways, certain aspects of psi, when we're talking about these multiple potential dimensions and these aspects of relative non-locality, it's non-local for us in 3 dimensions of space in a moment in time, but it might not be non-local in the 4th, 5th, and 6th dimension, and there one might be able to look downwards into that box from outside that box, and some of the box might be transparent, and some of the box might be translucent, we can see right in. But when we look at those things, we have different ideas, because how do we falsify that? And we introduced a concept, that's Dr. Edward Close and myself, called LFAF, lower dimensional feasibility, absent falsification. So we took Popper's falsification. Yeah, it's wonderful if you can falsify things in science, but sometimes it's not feasible to be able to fully falsify it. it's like in our little overt reality, we have a jigsaw puzzle. And we have different pieces of our jigsaw, and we only can put some of them together, particularly when we're going to higher dimensions, or when we're going to evolution, or when we're going to cosmology and dark matter and, dark energy. And when we have this, that jigsaw puzzle, we've got to say, it's not been falsified, okay? But it can be feasible, and it fits into the jigsaw. And this is what this idea of TDVP, triadic dimensional distinction vortical paradigm, is all about, because it involves dimensions, it involves those triad space-time consciousness and later mass energy consciousness content. It involves the finite and the infinite. It involves some complex mathematics. And I'll just give you one basic example called the calculus of distinctions, originally developed by Edward Close, and in part based on the work of George Spencer Brown in terms of the laws of form.
Yes.
And which we extended. But the important component here is ultimately, we called part of this the calculus of dimensional distinctions. So it involved dimensions, and this was because we were dealing with quantized reality. So you have a quantum, and a quantum, no matter how small, it's not infinitesimal going to nothing. It is still volumetric.
Quantum is the Planck length.
Right, but we're talking volumes. Effectively, we're not just talking about one single unitary linear length.
It's 3-dimensional.
And so when we start looking at it this way, that's the example of the mathematics, because it introduces this calculus of distinctions that has a limitation in terms of looking at reality. And all of our work looks at reality. We're not dealing with mathematics in a theoretical way. It's a quantized way. It's a fundamental component of this is part of reality. String theory, as I'm seeing it, is not a part of reality. It is fundamental only from a mathematical point of view, and one can prove these. But that's a diversion.
Yes.
So we've got mathematics, we've got finite, infinite, we've got space-time consciousness, we've got mass energy consciousness, we've got these vortices, we've got this new paradigm, we've got what is subjective and we can experience overtly in terms of our own living, and we've got the existence that goes beyond it. And here's the most exciting component. When you start going to existence, you say, wait a minute, there's something wrong. The something wrong is us, is we are living. And no matter how much DNA we can talk about and RNA, and how much we can talk about in terms of beauties of chemistry, and this is also part of our TDVP model, it's a terribly important component. But no matter how much we have of this, how did that life, that fundamental life, come in? Where did we insert that spark? When did this life begin? How does it fit in? And our model of TDVP tries to even explain that.
Well, you're biting off a lot.
I am.
It's an enormous task you've set before yourself, and you seem very satisfied that you're arriving at some answers here. It seems that you're hitting on one of the great mysteries, which is how is it that we finite mortal beings are also connected to infinity?
Exactly that. And how we fit hitting it, we're hitting it with this mystery of life and with this mystery of order. And life is part of that order. So let's look at that for a moment. Reality begins with consciousness, and the order there, where does that begin? Well, we've said it begins in a non-ending way at that infinite level because it was forever there. There's no contradiction. And the mystery is this one, that in physics, we keep talking about entropy. We keep talking about the tendency towards disorder. And yet, we living beings are very ordered. Order is fundamental to this TDVP model.
Our order has been increasing, in fact, for billions of years. Our earliest ancestors were probably single-celled organisms 4 billion years ago, and now look at us.
Right. We are a little different. We are a little bit evolutionarily advanced.
So that's negentropic.
Well, it's more than negentropic. This is the beauty about it. You see, when Ed Close and I began our work, we started using the word negentropy, and then we found others were using it in a different sense, and then we started using the word extropy, and we found others might be using extropy, and eventually we came up with ordtropy. The ord being order. And we realized it wasn't one dimension of order, it was a multi-dimensional order. So it was in every kind of way. Now you could argue that the second law of thermodynamics is boom, 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 we are tending towards disorder, and yet you're pointing out we're not tending towards disorder.
No, the conventional explanation is simply that if it weren't for the sun, life couldn't have evolved. And so we're getting all that negentropy in the form of energy coming to us from the sun.
So just as well we have a sun out there, and I wonder what happens if one extending beyond just solar kinds of components here. But I will say this, that even if we have a sun, how is that sun producing our life? Life is the big mystery. So this introduces the whole idea. Where does life come from? Well, my theory is this, that life always exists. I've been emphasizing to you, Jeff, more than experience, I've been talking about existence. Life never ceases. Everything is immortal. Everything continues at that infinite level forever.
Well, that's the opposite of, let's say, Buddhism, which suggests nothing is permanent.
It is an opposite. Here we have a positive thing where life never ceases to exist. We could use a different term. We can use the term existence. And if we use that term existence, it helps because people don't feel too badly. Well, you still are born, you still are dying. And the reason why you being able to exist as living, sentient beings in between is this whole combination of one's physiology and one's anatomy and everything functioning according to those components. So when one dies at this dimensional level, that's it. The physiology dies. The anatomical changes and the pathological changes are such that we cannot continue to exist at that dimensional level.
Right.
But it doesn't mean to say that we are not continuing to exist. And this is why I said there was a contradiction that was required in terms of aspects of this. You see, the whole TDVP model is not based on this is supernatural, this is miraculous. It all fits within the laws of nature, within the laws of what we know. It's just there are aspects that we don't know, and we can just put together our little pieces of our jigsaw puzzle in relation to that.
You seem to be suggesting, Vernon, that your theory is consistent with the anthropic cosmological principle in the strong sense of that principle, meaning that spirit, consciousness, has created the universe so that our biological existence could occur, that the sun itself that gives life to all of evolution was at some level created by our infinite consciousness.
Yes, you are right. I am suggesting that in a way. In fact, we have a whole section on the anthropic principle in our book, Reality Begins with Consciousness. But I must point out that there have been so many advances beyond reality begins with consciousness that this is what's even more exciting. So what's even more exciting is, for example, the awareness that there had to be a third substance. And we knew mathematically there had to be a third substance, and we were able to prove mathematically that there was, because you needed symmetry and stability in certain particles. And moreover, this is what's so astonishing, so amazing, that if you look at the periodic table of the elements, and you say, now what elements are the elements of life? Elements of life, hydrogen, predominant. And you'll find it contains more gimmel than anything else, because we're calling that third principle gimmel. Nitrogen, oxygen.
Let's not forget carbon.
Sulfur, carbon, magnesium,
Phosphates.
calcium, and not phosphorus.
Okay.
Initially, we thought it had to be phosphorus. It had to be. These were the elements of life. All of those elements of life have a certain commonality. They have proportionately more gimmel, more third substance, than any of the other elements.
Now, I know this is something you've worked out mathematically. It's not as if you've measured gimmel physically.
We've measured gimmel mathematically, theoretically, but based. Again, you remember we said that mathematics was linked up with reality. It wasn't something at the Aristotelian level. It was something at that Platonic level, something at that Pythagorean level.
But when you talk about gimmel, it's not something I can hold in my hand like kryptonite.
Well,
theoretically.
You're holding it in your hand because we all exist. Every single part, every single thing there is linked up. If you want, gimmel is meaningful information, meaningful consciousness that is in everything.
The contents of consciousness, isn't that how you described it?
And these proportions, in terms of those contents of consciousness, the elements of life, using the periodic table of the elements, are higher in gimmel than all of the others, and they're the same equal proportion of gimmel. And they all fit into a mathematics where when you start looking at integers, numbers, and you do the lowest level numbers, we had to go through all of these again empirically and find that they were all cubes of 108 cubed, which incidentally is 3 cubed times 2 squared. But interesting that this figure 108, if you look it up on the internet, you'll find all sorts of link-ups.
Indeed, with many mystical ideas as well. Well, we have a couple of minutes left.
Right. So let me just give you this fabric in terms of this gimmel, that it's so important.
Okay.
Because gimmel exists in everything. In the slightest subatomic particle, you can link up the atom. Protons plus neutrons plus electrons. The protons plus neutrons plus electrons equals atoms. And these are all volumetric. And the only way one can calculate this and find stability and symmetry is if you add in that third substance, that gimmel, which we might call consciousness. And in fact, Dr. Close has developed an equation in mathematics called the Conveyance Equation, where we have an equation of consciousness. You might say at the cosmological level, how do we calculate it? Amazing. Dark matter plus dark energy together proportionate. What proportion do they equal in terms of the cosmos? We hypothesized that there must be a linkage with gimmel and what we're calling true units, which is what our calculation is all about, combining mass, energy, and that gimmel, triadic rotational units of equivalence. They're identical. This is the most amazing thing, because we thought would be within 2% or something. They both work out at 86.1%, this proportion. So gimmel is in everything, and this is part of this whole model, this whole fabric. Yeah. It's very, very exciting.
Well, Vernon Neppe, I hope that some of our listeners will listen again and again, because I imagine what you've just said in the last 2 minutes might take somebody 10 years to understand fully. It's, as you say, a new paradigm. It's profound. It reaches deep. It's going to challenge people at many, many levels.
And it involves a whole new discipline called dimensional biopsychophysics. And that's why it takes so long to study.
Dr. Vernon Neppe, thank you so much for being with me. We will continue our discussions.
Thank you, Jeff.
And thank you for being with us.